Francis, I think we have almost everybody. So you can get started whenever you like.
Great. Zoom has updated and it's changed its buttons. That's very annoying.
I'm gonna press play on the recording, so it'll probably let you know in 1 second. Okay.
Okay. Are we set? So to make sure that everyone's aware that the meeting is being recorded. Welcome. So the goal of today is to look again at the guidelines that we drafted last term. These are the guidelines for recommendations for continuity, academic continuity in the event of a GTFF strike. We presented the past draft to the Senate and took feedback at that meeting. And the Senate leadership posted a survey for people to respond to, and you've all received that set of feedback. Came in an Excel file, I think. And then we had some discussions among Senate leadership, myself, and Ron Bramhall of that feedback, and we've written a draft for you to look at. So that's been circulated with this meeting, so you should have a PDF of the draft. And what we need to do today is to come up with the next draft, sort of responding and incorporating the comments that came from the Senate and any other feedback that you got, because you remember I asked you to share with your committees and councils for additional feedback. And that's the version we have here. So does everybody have that version in front of them? Oh, thank you, Sandy.
Yeah, I just put on it's actually been posted on the Academic Council website since I believe December 13th. But this is
the Senate's website.
The Senate's website. It is the Academic Council's page on the Senate website, but yes. The link is now also in the
I like to call it the Senate website because I can't post on it. And if I get asked to post on it, I'm like, it's not mine. Please stop asking me to do things that I can't possibly do. Yes, no, on the Senate's website for Academic Council. That's great. Maybe I could just talk briefly through the parts of the feedback that we were that we really focused on, things that we couldn't do, I think, based on the boundaries that we're operating under. So just to remind everyone, the boundaries we're operating under are set by the academic continuity plan that was voted on back in something or other. So that it's like what we can do has to fall within the purview of the academic continuity plan, or rather the purview is not the right word, but the descriptions of it, plus any limitations that fall on remaining within the academic realm and the area that Academic Council is responsible for. Or is appointed, whatever it is, delegated as responsible for by the Senate. I think that's probably the correct language. So one of the major changes you'll see is on the discussion of replacement instructor of records using the language from the instructor of record policy. And that is on page 3, where we made it very clear, as at a request from many, clear that if there are instructors that are not present because of a strike and an additional instructor of record needs to be put on that course, then they are put on, but the original instructor is not removed, but it comes back when they return to work. So that we made it very clear that this is not a take all the GEs that are teaching courses as instructor of records off, but rather adding an additional person, and that when the GE comes back, they resume their role, right? So that it's made very clear as you go down there where it says GEs as IOR, instructor of record, that the addition of an instructor of record happens in accordance with the policy, but not a replacement. So this is an additional one, and that when the labor action ends, when the strike ends, the transition is organized or managed by the head as it would be, but the original GE maintains control of the course as the instructor of record. Is there any questions, discussion on this part first? Because this was the major clarification. I mean, this was basically trying to be much clearer of what we originally intended to say. Thoughts, comments, thumbs up? Resounding silence. I saw a thumbs up. I saw one thumbs up. Thank you, Erin. I think it makes it much clearer, and it makes it emphasizing what was our original intent, which is the GEs as instructor of records remain the instructor of record with an additional person to run during the strike, but then they return to that position. And remembering, I think as I just discussed when I presented it originally to the Senate, this was one of the major issues in the 2014 strike, the one that sort of led to the whole academic continuity plan. Any thoughts on this? Or just looks good as a revision? I'm hearing resounding silence, which I think is a good news. I think this was also one of the major areas of concern that we were not clear enough in the first set of guidelines. Hearing no major comments, we'll move on. The other things were restating the academic principles to be followed. So we had not restated them because we kept saying they're in the academic continuity plan, and we referred to that, but no, they wanted them restated, and that's absolutely fine. So that's just restated the additions at the beginning. The other part that was a bit trickier was around stating support for the GE's ability to strike, or how would I say that? They're sort of supporting them generally. This is sort of outside the scope of what we can do within the academic continuity plan as originally described. We pulled a sentence from the original academic continuity plan, which says something like, now I've forgotten where that sentence ended up, which was basically, you know, I can't remember what it was. Do you remember what it was, Ron? It was something like,
it's under principles. It's
Yeah, it's on page 1 at the very bottom of the red.
yeah, any academic continuity plans and their implementation must comply with all existing collective bargaining agreements.
right. And that's taken directly from the academic continuity plan. So that's sort of our, again, a restatement of the principles, but we don't really have any room to go further than that without going outside the academic continuity plan itself. And I think that was everything. Was there anything else you could think of? Ron, you'll remember the details.
And I think that's it. I mean, you
I
covered
think that was it. Yeah.
the added paragraph on page 5. It's just restating what's already above in the instructor of record.
Isn't that the instructor of record restatement?
Yeah, it's just about.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it basically deals with how do you deal with the transition plan. So if a replacement instructor has been providing instruction, there needs to be communication between that replacement and the GE when they return. And that's this handover basically is helped by the unit head. And remember the original instructor of record and additional instructor of record, it has very defined roles within the instructor of record policy itself, so that they're not changing the course in any way. They're following the course as it's laid out by the original instructor of record, so that they don't add anything or take anything away. They follow the actual course as laid out originally. But that's all defined within the instructor of record policy and the academic continuity plan. So thoughts?
Francis, so I had a question. So any repercussions that happen to the GEs, like in terms of their stipends and so forth, so that's considered labor, so that we're not covering that whatsoever? Is that right?
That's right. I mean, there's no retaliation repercussions allowed under, as I understand it. Perhaps would Peter be the one to talk about the implications on GEs as graduate students, right? Because their stipends come through them being graduate students, but that's not something that is under the academic purview, right? That's controlled under labor law, or is it contract law? Is that right? Yes, Peter says yes. So that's outside our realm of responsibility.
Okay, great.
And is clearly, as I remember from the first strike, it's clearly defined in labor law as well, that there can't be repercussions. I think that was there anything else that you remember from the comments that we talked about and said that was outside our realm to respond to? I don't remember anything else specifically. I see a comment from
Yeah, it's from
Jagdeep.
Peter might correct me,
I
but
believe that's settled in the bargaining to end the
yeah,
strike.
the decision about whether a GE gets paid as they would or they don't is in the settlement agreement. So it won't really depend upon the work they did per se. They're not hourly in that respect.
Any other thoughts? I think this is a good improvement and a good improved clarity. I know that many of the senators were frustrated with us having to navigate where the academic realm lies versus whatever it is, the bargaining and contract stuff lies, but we're very much on the academic side. Aaron?
Yeah, thanks. My internet's a little iffy, so it's possible I may cut out here. But I did. So I noticed one thing in the comments that people raised. There was a desire for, I think, more practical, sort of pragmatic solutions to some of these problems was one of the things that I think was asked for. So a lot of this document is talking in general terms. I'm not sure exactly how we can solve that without doing a lot of work and making a very long document. But I did notice, just looking through it, one place, and maybe there's a few others where we could maybe be a little clearer. So for example, I think it's the second full paragraph on page 2. If the IOR in consultation with the unit head reasonably determines that the learning outcomes cannot be met even with such adjustments, or that such adjustments will lead to an unreasonable amount of work, then the completion of the course may be delayed until the missing instructional or grading work is completed. It might be good. My understanding of that is that means that's when emergency grades would kick in. Is that, am I understanding that correctly? And if that's so, we could be clear about stating what the faculty member does in that situation.
Right. So one of the issues is that the decision on how courses are deemed complete or not complete, or what things should be done, is at the department level. So, that's a department level decision, and we want to support and affirm the department level decision on how they decide on whether the course is done or not. I think a lot of the emergency grade stuff has come out because we're
Yeah.
now talking about a situation that's,
I guess it's not whether or not it's completed or not, but what does it, how does a very practical issue, how does the completion of a course get delayed? Like, as a faculty member, that's not immediately obvious to me how that is going to happen. And I'm just like, that's all the clarity I'm asking for. Sorry, I think I'm cutting
I'm
off.
sorry, I'm confused now. You mean if the instructor decides that the course, that the material that should be presented and tested on in the course has not been gone through?
Right. If the decision is made that the completion of the course should be delayed,
Yes.
how does that in fact happen? Just laying out what that process is. Is it not the emergency?
I'm sorry. I think I understand. How would a person who has decided their course is not completed actually now translate that to it has not been completed? Is that right?
Right. Yes.
Okay. So that my understanding of that is that they tell their unit head, and the unit head reports on for courses that are not completed.
It might be clearer to say, actually, because I think what we mean there is that the grades might be delayed. I mean, that's actually what we mean, right? Is that grading might be delayed.
Wouldn't that be the, I guess maybe this is where maybe again, this is where maybe some clarity talking about when would emergency grades get kicked in? Because my reading of that statement was that's when if the course can't be completed, then you can assign emergency.
Then you use emergency grades, yes.
As discussed in the section below, just to make that very clear to faculty what the process is going to be.
Yeah.
Right. So saying right there, the completion of the course may be delayed until the missing instruction or grading work is completed. And then saying in that case, emergency grades would be used if we reach the end of the grading period.
Right. If I'm understanding.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes, that would be my understanding as well. I'm sorry, I didn't understand before. I think I've probably thought about this too much. Okay, so if we added in a sentence to the end of that second paragraph, so then the completion of the course may be delayed until the missing instruction or graded work is completed, and emergency grades will be used until it is completed, or something like that. Alison?
It might be helpful. I'm not sure if this level of detail, because I do recall the same feedback that Aaron shared about the practical part. So it might be helpful to explain that the way that happens. And my understanding was that an instructor would provide the CRN to the department head, and the CRN would then move that forward. So it would be a batch emergency grade, but I'm not sure if that type of detail belongs in this document, though that is part of the practical process for the emergency grade application.
Right, and my understanding is I don't think that process is quite worked out yet. Julia?
My concern has to do with the term completeness. If a course appears on a transcript with a grade, even if it's an emergency grade, that course is completed, the student has the credit, it's done. And so I don't know exactly what was meant by that line, but if the transcript record is put on the transcript, that course is done with a grade and credit. So that feels complete to me. And the record seems to be complete if the course is there with credit earned. So if what we really mean is if grading is, I don't know what was intended by that line. But once a transcript record is on with credit, it's complete.
So my understanding of that is that if a if the instructor feels that the full instruction, the course materials, the learning exercise, and everything has not been completed, either probably one reason for that would be there was no replacement instruction during the loss of the instructor of record. They would say that they haven't done 4 credits worth of work, so that the grade is not the final grade. It's the grade of work so far, which is what the emergency
I would
grades
argue
allow
that if the
for.
course isn't completed, that's an incomplete.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, yes, right.
I think what we meant here is what Francis said, which is in the case where an instructor of record determines students actually haven't been given enough work or instruction here to complete the course as I intended, then the course is not completed per se, but those students are still going to get at least an emergency grade, because we're not going to penalize them for what's happening. So it's a bit of a tricky spot, because they are going to get credit and they're going to get this emergency grade, which is some sort of pass or no pass based on whatever they've done to this point. And then we won't have any more work to grade, so we're going to call it good at that point. So I think that's what we meant. So we just need to figure out how to say all that, if we still mean that. That's what's meant in the continuity policy. This is more relevant if this is at the end of the term, obviously.
So that it does change the how do we say this, right? Is it incompletes may be appropriate, right? Rather than emergency grades are appropriate.
But Francis, I don't want to suggest that we give incompletes to students for work they haven't completed because we weren't able to give it.
Because it was incomplete instruction rather than incomplete
Right.
of the course.
So
I think this is a fiddly bit we've not worked through before.
well, I think we could just say simply that then the result might be that students get emergency grades instead of regular grades. I think that's what we mean to say, right?
Right, but there is still a capacity to take an emergency grade to a non-emergency grade if the work is completed and graded. Which
Yeah,
can,
but this
yeah.
particular sentence is talking about the scenario where that's not possible.
Well, it's not possible by the time grades are due. What happens if it's after grades are due and additional instruction could be provided if it was paid for? Right, so that is that a possibility in discussions that I know we talked about, for example, requiring grades later than the regular deadline. That does that provide a window that could go, for example, into bargaining for the end of the strike that would allow instruction to go on later? I don't know. Alison?
Yeah, it sounds to me that that's I know in prior discussions there was it was discussed that the potential for GEs to go back and finish a term, but that was all based on negotiation of settlement. So I don't know, and that's the labor part. So I don't know how this document or what could be stated to make that clear as a possibility. But again, that's all part of a settlement that we just don't know.
Right, and we don't have any hand in. Is that something that could potentially be part of a settlement, or should we not?
Well, I mean, let's suppose, I don't know, there's a strike in week 2 and 3, and students turned in a bunch of work and it didn't get graded and it's sitting there. It could be part of the settlement that GEs would complete that grading upon their return, right? And then we can deem that the course is completed, right? Because
Right.
all of the work's been submitted and graded. So I don't think that's what this sentence is talking about. I think this sentence is talking about that situation where I don't know, a strike started in week 6 and it went on till week 11, God forbid. And there just simply wasn't enough instruction to complete the course as it was planned. Therefore, we're going to give students emergency grades based on whatever they did. So I think this particular sentence is talking about that very specific scenario.
In which
And Ron, I
case-
think I would
sorry.
add that the next step that the university's envisioned, if that's the case, is emergency grades. Not that students don't get the credit, not that students come back some later time and do more work later. And so that's been my understanding, that the one thing we have to do, if that were the case, is to assign emergency grades.
So I think you could say something like at the, in consultation, determines the outcomes can't be met even with adjustments, or it would lead to unreasonable work, then emergency grades would be issued for those courses. Right? That's sort of what we're saying, I think.
How does that sound to people? So would you, so it would say, if the instructor of record in consultation with the unit head reasonably determines that the learning outcomes cannot be met even with such adjustments, or that such adjustments would lead to an unreasonable amount of work, then emergency grades
be issued for those
would
courses.
be issued for that course.
I would add up above where it says learning outcomes cannot be met by the end of the term. And then I think it,
End of term or when grades are due?
by the grade deadline, yes.
By the grade deadline?
I mean, this is really talking about instruction. It's not talking about delayed grading. So by the end of the term, you were either able to give the instruction you thought was appropriate or not. So. I wanted to mention too, because it reminded me, and Julia, you might have a thought here, but it would have been, it had this happen at the end of the term in the fall, it would have been much easier to delay the grading deadline. That's going to be a challenge in the
In the
winter
spring.
term
Yeah.
to do. So.
Okay, so I think we've got a draft edit. Erin, did you have other points? I think you said there were a few.
Oh, no, that was the only one I noticed. I was just wondering if there might be other places people notice, or as a close read might notice those kinds of things. I think sometimes when you've been going through this a lot, it seems obvious what the next step is, but I think what we saw at the Senate is that a lot of faculty members are confused about, okay, what does this actually mean in practice? So just
Yeah, I
identify.
think I've read this thing far too many times.
Yeah. But that's what I noticed. So if other people have others,
Yes.
I'm happy to.
I appreciate you noticing very much. Okay.
Francis
we got-
Jag has another
Oh, I'm sorry.
in the chat. That's okay.
Oh. Oh, yes. This is something we had discussed a lot, which is another way of saying, oh my goodness, what did we decide? And I think part of it is it becomes part of the process that it's just going to have to be decided at course by course, department by department, what to do with sequenced courses.
We, during COVID, when we had the ability to switch to pass, no pass, we let departments decide whether
To accept it or
those
not. Yeah.
could count towards major requirements or not.
So I think it would be a department by department or program by program decision whether they would accept the emergency grades as fulfilling the prereq or sequenced course. Because it very much has to be within their purview. That's a department thing. Should we say anything about that? Yeah. And if so, where should it go?
Hey, Francis, just for the record, just to make sure that for the recording, I don't know. So Jag's, we just talk about what Jag's comment is and what the topic we're talking about right now, just out loud.
So her comments about sequence courses and courses counting as a prereq. So if the course that happens during the strike period is a prereq for another course that has potentially a grade requirement or just the completion requirement, or it's a sequence like a 102, 103, 104 type of situation where the first course is required to be completed before you can take the second course. How does having emergency grades or having this whole issue of was the course completed impact what departments should do in terms of accepting it as a prereq having fulfilled or the previous sequence being fulfilled? And as we did in COVID, and I thank you, Ron, for that reminder, it would be the department's decision whether or not that counts sufficient for the prereq requirement or the sequence requirement. And we would encourage departments to be generous and understanding and helpful as we did for the COVID, but it is very much a department decision. Julia?
I would just add the caveat, if the requirement is for a grade. If the requirement is just for the course to exist and be on the record, it would be on the record. So it would only be
automatically
those
count.
courses
Yeah.
that had an emergency grade and that the prereq stated a grade
A
level.
letter grade, right. And there are a few of those. So it would seem that it should go in the section down towards the bottom, maybe.
Well, I would
Um,
just put it actually right after the sentence we just modified if we're gonna make a statement. 'Cause
Okay.
it follows from that idea that if we have to end up giving emergency grades for a particular courses, then here's what units should do if those emergency grades are prereqs that require a grade.
Okay, let me get back to where that was. That was on page 2, the second paragraph. So that we would say an added sentence or added section that says, should it actually state that emergency grades count as completed courses for prereqs? Or should it say that and courses with required grades should be determined by departments as whether they fulfill requirements?
Francis, I would
Yeah.
put something only about the emergency grades. A completed course has to equal a completed course. And I don't know that we
Okay,
need to
so
state that.
it would be for emergency grades for courses that are prereqs with required grades should be determined by the, that's not even a sentence, I'm sorry. I think I even failed to put a verb in there. Need someone who can actually write to make a sentence for that. Do you have the concept, Ron?
Yeah. I'm working on it.
Okay. My suggestion is, as we do with all of these, when we change the document, is we will make a change and we'll send it out by email to everybody. And it will enable any more close reading that's needed before we have to decide. And remembering these are deciding on the guidelines. voting on the guidelines doesn't happen unless a strike, implementing the guidelines doesn't actually happen unless strike is actually declared, and then we'd have to meet again to vote on that. So these are guidelines in preparation for a situation, as we were charged with doing. And just as another reminder, in case you were feeling good, we're also charged with coming up with guidelines due to a disruption to the electrical grid and earthquake. We haven't done that one yet. Alison.
I worry about the, I hope, unlikely scenario of what's set up with that in terms of a department saying that an emergency grade does not meet a prerequisite, and then the position that would put a GE instructor in being really feeling like they had to go back to fix an emergency grade so that the students could progress, if that makes sense. I would hope a department would be generous in their read of emergency grades, but that is in my head that sets up that tension. If a department says, nope, that doesn't count as a prereq, then I just worry about what kind of position. And not necessarily asking for a resolution in the document, but just that's on my mind about what might be an outcome unintentional.
Yes, it would be very much an unintentional outcome. And it's the pressure that any instructor would feel when they're told that, that's not acceptable for, the students to continue on. But I assume that, any requiring additional work would require additional pay, so that if there is a solution in terms of providing missing instruction, someone is going to have to pay for that. But yes, I understand. Oh, I'm sorry, Julia?
Francis, not to further complicate things, but the idea that a student would be available for future instruction past the end of the term is also something that should be questioned.
True.
Right. So again, let's hope not to be in that situation, but that is also an expectation I don't think we can have, that a student would be available later.
Right. No, it is quite true. Which brings me around to another question I have been asked at times, which is, are you allowed to provide instruction during finals week? Which has been a question that's bounced around at various times. Our general answer has been no, but it is a scheduled meeting time of the class. Okay. Sorry, my dog has decided to dig the floor up. Okay, so where are we? We've got the change to that paragraph to say emergency grades will be used, and the change that will add about emergency grades on courses that are prereqs with required grade amounts. That would be at the purview of the program concerned. And we would encourage them to be generous. It might be something as basic as where you need to add something into the next course, but we can't, again, tell departments to do that. And we can't tell departments they have to accept something. Okay, other thoughts? Or would you rather we put that changes in and send it back out again? I think we're getting down into very final details now. Oh, I'm sorry, Aaron, I didn't see your hand.
I know, I just have a clarification question. Maybe I misunderstood, but there was, while discussing the emergency grades, there was a mention of, or at least what I understood was that, so the record is set, and then, students can move on, or maybe even like continue with the sequence courses. But at the very end of page 4, when we have the grade section, it says instructional work required to complete the course will be conducted and compensated according to appropriate labor agreements. Upon completion, students will then receive regular grades. So, for example, let's say the bargaining, or the situations work out, and then there's a settlement saying that the courses will be completed. Let's say there's 4 weeks of time left, etc., so that the instructors might happily go and teach it because of the settlements, but then students might fail in the final. So that I'm just like, I want to clarify that statement, if I understood correctly, about the records are being set and the credits are being earned, but this last sentence saying, upon completion, students will then receive regular grades, which might be a fail. There's no guarantee. So if the records are set and then students earn the credit with the emergency grades, and then when things are settled in one way, which will let instructors of records to complete the course and give a non-emergency grade, how are we going to resolve the conflicts there?
It's a good question. I think it's something we did talk about before as well, because the emergency grade reflects work to date, or the submitted work. And it won't include work that hasn't been graded, or the work that is yet to be completed. And it's possible to fail a course based on the final chunk of work.
And this could have implications for the decision makers from the units or the programs, right? Let's say I need to make a decision. I might try to be lenient, but if there is a possibility that the 4 or 5 weeks of work will be completed, and then students will get a failing grade, or vice versa, by the way, it could be
Right.
the other way as well.
Could be the other
right?
way around. Yes, it can be the other way around. Especially, I mean, one of the things we talked a lot about were courses where a major chunk of the grade comes in a final paper, right? Because that's obviously going to be a very swing event in terms of its impact on the grade. I think part of this is just clarity, that just because someone got a certain emergency grade for a chunk of the course, it doesn't define what grade they will get for the completed course. The completed course is based on all of the work, right? So there's more of a recognition that yes, that can happen, that students need to be aware that can happen. And that if a course stops for a while and then starts again, they need to come back and do the starts again part of the course. They can't just take their emergency grade. Because it will be true that if they don't come back, they won't complete the course from their perspective. So I think that's clarity. I also think much as we did during COVID, we reminded departments that they can waive requirements if they feel it's appropriate, so that they may say this course doesn't fulfill prereqs, but we'll waive it for this year because it's not the student's fault, and they tried to take the course. I think yes, Jagdeep also raised the repeat policy issue. I believe, Ron, help me here, in the original emergency grades, these do not count as students are allowed to repeat. Is that right? There was some language on the repeatability thing. Do you remember what it was, or do you have to go look it up? Because I'd have to go look it up. So I remember the original emergency grades has some language about repeatability in there.
I don't. I can look it up though.
Jag, you have your hand up.
I wanted to clarify that I
Yes.
wasn't talking about whether they could repeat. I was talking more about if the department decides that this does not meet prereqs, then they will need to repeat
They'll
and
need to
pay for
repeat.
those credits. Yes.
Yes.
And also, I'm a little confused about the issue that Erin raised, because emergency grades will only kick in at the end of the term. And at that point, there's no going back for 4 weeks of instruction, as Julia pointed out, right? Because undergrads will not be available to do that.
Right. That's a good point. Yes.
Yeah.
You are correct.
But just to clarify, aren't we now, by adding that sentence to the incomplete part, so aren't we also opening emergency grades for courses that are not complete? Or maybe I'm totally
So
misunderstanding.
it would be more like, right, the instruction's complete, but the grading is not. So the emergency grade would reflect everything that had been graded to date, but then the actual grading happening could change the student's final grade, right? So that this is more of the situation we looked at in the fall, if the strike happened at the end of the term, that, you know, the papers may have been written, but they won't have been graded. So there may be emergency grades given, but the final grade may be different when the grading happens, not instruction. So I was not describing it very well. I was trying to think of how this would happen with a strike that happens earlier in the term. Because if it happens earlier in the term, we're not at grades yet. All right, we're talking about instruction. Aaron.
Yeah, I guess in that point is there an implied expectation here that instructors will continue to collect assignments that cannot be graded during the strike?
Yes, yeah, the course will continue in that.
Right, so you'll just pile up a bunch of ungraded assignments, which then may
Right.
or be
Right, presumably with the replacement instructor. Yes.
well, or they may just sit ungraded, and depending on the negotiation for the
Right.
of the settlement, be graded or not graded.
Right.
But if the strike goes on for a long time, you're talking about asking undergrads to turn in a bunch of assignments that may or may not be graded. So they're doing a lot of work that may or may not be evaluated. At some point, you may get into questions of whether that's, you know, it's ethical to ask students to continue to complete work which doesn't appear to be, you know, it's not going to be evaluated.
I would sincerely hope the intention is to get it graded, right? That
Yeah.
because if the ability to grade comes along, the work needs to be there at that
Yeah.
point.
Mhm.
Allison?
Yeah, so I appreciate the point about being able, an instructor could go back and finish the grading for the course and offer a formal grade, non-emergency grade. And just wondering again about for students, a sequence of that, and if they had, if they weren't able to actually continue on because of a failure of a class, that seems like a scenario to avoid that I'm thinking about right now. And in terms of thinking about too, the document, I mean, a lot of that is dependent on the negotiation. So wondering how the document, it's how to capture these different scenarios that are very conjecture, because we just don't know timing, nor do we know the end point of settlement. And then also thinking about the equity in terms of, are all emergency grades going to be converted, or just a few, or who gets access to that? That's what I'm also thinking about in terms of that final grade point. But I also understand that we just don't have timing yet, so it's a lot of scenario building.
Right, and a lot of that is going to depend on whether replacement instruction happens, right? So there will be courses that had replacement instruction possible and those that did not. And I mean, a lot of the questions resolve around ones where there was no way to do replacement instruction. Oh, and I should read Ron's text. So from the policy, this is from the academic continuity policy and the emergency grades policy. Emergency grades will not be included in calculations of grade point average, and students within an emergency grade are exempt from the course repeat policy for that course. So that's not what Jag was asking, but it's relevant in the sense that if they need to take the course again, they can. Right, they're not exempted by the course repeat policy that doesn't let students retake for credit a course that they've already passed. It lets them take one they failed, but not one they've passed. If they need, for example, a certain grade to have it count as a prereq for another course. Now I've lost track of have we discussed and answered everything that's been raised. You're going to have to remind me. I think one of the things that would be useful, but we had talked about before, was having more guidelines from the employment related side that sort of deals with the things that we don't deal with in the academic plan. I know we talked about it last term and it was felt that it would not be a good idea to do it until such time as it becomes extremely urgent. But that's where a lot of the questions I would be sending them, basically, is to what I think of as the deans and provost administration side and the employment side. So we're sort of like we're putting out more help, and where do we send people who lie outside our ability to help?
So, so who actually makes the decision in terms of whether the academic disruption recommendations are going beyond the academic continuation policy? Like, who actually determines that?
So in the original academic continuity plan, we relied on general counsel to read them and to give us a, yes, this is okay. And it wasn't just a simple thing, it was a set of conversations of where things lay. But I imagine that would be the same process. Do you know, Ron?
I mean, yeah, I guess so. I mean, is there a particular question, Gerard, or are you just asking in general?
I'm asking in general because I'm anticipating some forthcoming motions. So I'm just asking in general.
I mean, I would look to Peter to help us here, help understand who would know. I mean, what we've tended to operate on is our understanding from the training that we've got over the past few years and the past times that we did this, in terms of, like, you know, this is in this realm and this is in that realm. And it's certainly been confirmed by questions I've asked of things that have come up. But I'm not sure who to direct that to. Would it be general counsel? Would it be your office, Peter? Would it be Ron who has to go find the answers?
What was the question? I'm sorry, I missed it.
It's in terms of what lies, issues and questions and requests for statements on things that lie outside the academic realm, that lie in the labor relations or employment or contract realm.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the ELR has a webpage right now, and so ELR would be probably the clearinghouse for that information, even if we had to seek out provost or general counsels.
So employment and labor relations website. Yeah.
So I'm a little confused, sorry. So, because my question was about, you know, if the academic disruption recommendations go beyond the academic continuation policy, then we would ask the labor folks to decide that? What?
I think that's why we have the experts on we've invited them to the meeting to help us stay.
Can I try to clarify? Gerard, are you asking whether there's a specific decision that would be made by a unit about whether or not that would be in a labor decision, or one that would be followed as an academic decision from inside the policy?
No, I'm simply asking who makes the determination of whether our recommendations go beyond the Senate's resolution on the academic continuation policy. So I guess it would.
Well, I don't think there's a decider. I mean, I think the way the academic continuity policy is written right now, the academic council votes on the guidance, and that vote that's the vote. Like, that's sort of the end of it. Now, I suppose someone could come later and say that they voted on something that was not in compliance with the policy. I suppose that would be a Senate matter to discuss and debate and run through your own processes. That would be my.
So the original academic continuity plan was reviewed and cleared by general counsel, that yes, we can say all those things. So that's sort of partly why we've stayed within that, right? We're within the academic continuity plan, because we know that's also reasonable.
Gerard, one thing I would say is that the academic continuity plan itself, which I put the link in the chat earlier, is the governing document, because that is actually considered a piece of university policy. These recommendations which are being made are as they're labeled, they're simply they're recommendations, I don't know the word we're using, but they're a guidance that is based off the reality of a specific situation. But I would say that the policy itself is always governing, based off the fact that that is considered a university policy. Does that make sense, Gerard?
Yeah, so it would be the Senate then that determines whether you're going too far, I guess.
I mean, I would have said it would be the Employment, Labor Relations, or General Counsel would say you've gone too far.
Well,
Right.
they could say whether or not there was a violation of policy. I think that, again, I don't think that I would say, do you see something inconsistent in these recommendations which don't, because I think this would be the place to talk about it. Because I think before Academic Council would pass this set of recommendations, I think it should be thoughtfully considered to make sure that they fit within the guiding document. Because if they don't, that again, it would be outside university policy. Does that make sense? And I don't think we should vote on something as I'm not a member of the Academic Council. I don't think Academic Council should vote on something that would be considered inconsistent. From my review as parliamentarian, as the secretary, I don't see anything that's inconsistent. But if a member of Academic Council thinks that what's being discussed right now would be inconsistent with the governing document in this case, which would be the academic continuity policy passed in 2019, that's something we should absolutely discuss as a part of Academic Council.
And I would say we'd be very careful to try to stay within the academic continuity policy as passed. And I keep referring back to it to make sure that we're staying within it. So I don't see anywhere that we've gone outside it. Thoughts, or in the interest of time, we'll send out another draft by email, right, with these changes that we have discussed. It will also give you a chance for another close read.
And Francis, I think, are you okay with, we're going to post that again, just on
Please,
the
yes.
same website, just to make sure that anyone who wants to provide feedback is able to.
Of course, the feedback has been very useful, especially on things that we have not. When you read it, it doesn't say what we think it says, or rather what I think it says. So being much clearer is very useful.
I just want to bring up the point that we don't have another meeting scheduled after today's, and we did kind of tentatively look at a time that might work for regular monthly meetings, but I wanted to kind of return to the subject now that we're talking about additional revisions to the draft under consideration, what we want to do in terms of additional meetings.
Thank you, Bettina, and thank you for scheduling and organizing all of this for us. I think it would be good to, I presume everybody's got schedules now, but to try to find a general time that we can get on the books. We will only need to meet once a month on our regular business, and any other meetings will be used as needed for emergencies, but it's good then if we find a time that generally works for most people.
Okay.
And of course, if we have nothing on the agenda, we will cancel the meeting ahead of time so that you can have that time back. I don't know if we've got any programs and things coming that we need to look at. I don't think so. And generally, when we've had one of these emergency sessions of having to do extra meetings, we try to not take on additional work because we realize this is an additional burden on top of your role as chair of your respective committees and councils. Okay, if you have any further thoughts, if you look at it again, please do email me and let me know. And otherwise look for an email draft that we will give a first pass at and then send out to everybody, and it can go back up on the Senate website. Does that sound good?
And Francis, can I ask a scheduling question?
Yes,
I think the goal was to hopefully have it be able to, we have, the first Senate exec meeting is going to be, is next Wednesday. There's a Senate meeting the week following. Again, we can't predict when there may be any movement in a labor action or a resolution, but pending that is, would you be okay with presenting the changes, at least as discussed here, to send exec on the 8th?
I would be very happy to. I have to
Great.
be there anyway, right? Because academic council chair is a seat on the Senate and the Senate exec. So I
Great.
will be there anyway. I'm happy to talk it through and hear any more feedback.
Thank you, Francis.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for your time and your thoughts and close reads. Really do appreciate it. And please have another look at it as it comes through. Thanks,
Can
everyone.
you stick around for a second, Francis?
Yeah.
Thanks for being here, everyone.